Yeah. I think it's much more appropriate for this talk
Okay,
than the academic one.
I would agree. And sounds like, are we streaming live?
Sounds like it. Yeah,
All
we're
right.
live now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Usman Malik. I am a physician and a writer, and I have a very exciting lineup of writers and activists and doctors and scientists today with us, and some media people as well. Without further ado, I'm gonna introduce our guest today, and I'm gonna start with Dr. Faraz Talat. Faraz is a medical doctor and a writer. Faraz's book, he's also the founder of the cultural space Cafe Soul in Islamabad. He is a writer with numerous online publications on the subjects of civil rights, public health, and arts and culture. And he is presently working in the psychiatric field, focusing on community programs that aim to make mental health care more accessible to the public. 74 Folio Books is his debut novella. Our second guest today is Anniqua Rana. Anniqua Rana lives in California with her husband and two sons. When she's not working as an educator in the community college system, she visits her family in Pakistan and England. The rest of the time, she reads, cooks, travels, and enjoys mystical music and poetry. Wild Boar in the Cane Field is her debut novel. Our third guest today is Kim Stanley Robinson, an American novelist widely recognized as one of the foremost living writers of science fiction. Robinson began publishing novels in 1984. His work has been described as humanist science fiction and literary science fiction. Robinson himself has been a proud defender and advocate of science fiction as a genre, which he regards as one of the most powerful of all literary forms. He's the author of three trilogies: Orange County Trilogy, Mars Trilogy, and Science in the Capital Trilogy, each comprising three novels. Our fourth guest today is Arafat Mazhar, who is the director of Puffball Studios and the director and producer of the animated cyberpunk slash dystopian movies Swipe and Shehre Tabassum. Welcome, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Hello.
It's great to have you guys. So I was hoping to maybe start off by, since we are talking about science fiction, and let me say it's so exciting to talk about science fiction in Pakistan because it is a genre that has historically been sort of marginalized, as I think most of us are aware of. I'll start with the general question for all of you of what science fiction as a genre is and does, whether it serves a purpose other modes of literature are not able to. I'm going to start with Faraz, and then we'll go in a circle.
Yeah. So, my entry into the science fiction genre was kind of accidental. I think it just kind of goes with the career, because I've been working as a clinician for several years, and I just thought I would pour that experience into my writing. I really like the science fiction genre because I think it really shapes the public's understanding of what science is, or what it isn't, where it's taking the world or where it shouldn't be taking the world. It's also sort of testing the knowledge of any specific region, I think, which is kind of yes. So this is what I'm actually going to a little concerned about, that there isn't a lot of development going on in the global south in terms of this the science fiction genre, and present company excluded. I think they've done some amazing work there. I screened Arafat Mazar, both of his films, over here at Cafe Soul, and they were a huge hit. And we're hoping to see more stuff like that as well. But I think the science fiction genre is important because it's helping people getting a better understanding of science, as well as the sort of the limitations that we have to deal with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for us. Kim, would you, I'm sorry, Stan, would you have any comments on science fiction? You've been in the field for quite a while now.
Yes, since the iconic year 1984, I regard science fiction, and I think it's self-evident as stories set in the future. And following on what Faraz said, science fiction was invented in cultures where history was moving so rapidly with technological changes that a sense of what you're future might be first appeared in France and England and the United States. And I want to remind you of magical realism coming out of Latin America as an expression of what their reality felt like in the 1960s. So it's not an accident. And what you have been seeing is magical realism being the genre that expresses many post-colonial countries in the global South. But now the whole world is industrialized, technologized, and so you see science fiction coming out of every country as a kind of national allegory for what that country's fate in the future might be, or a discussion of it. So this is why you're seeing science fictions coming out of places where before the natural literature would have been a kind of magical realism. And I think it's a good sign. It's a sign of the global interconnected society that we're all in now.
So one of the things that one of my favorite definitions of science fiction comes from Ted Chiang, who in an interview with the California Sunday magazine once said that science fiction is the literature that pushes the boundaries of scientific thought. And I've always found that a useful definition. Arafat, do you think that that is something that you're trying to do with Puffball Studios? And is that something that you think about in terms of science fiction?
I mean, no, that's not, I think, from where I would imagine my storytelling or our studio storytelling starts. I think the reason we started telling these cyber khilafat, as I call them, stories, was this imagination of what the printing press did for global South and Islamic terrorism. And what would a 10th century person imagine the technological advancements in the 18th century and the anxieties that the printing press created by a lot of hate literature being proliferated exponentially. And it was this the current anxieties of Twitter mixed with a lot of radical weaponizations of sentiments and emotions of honor of the prophet and religion in general, that I was interested in this tech and religion. So how does technology and religion intersect in our society right now? But how do we extrapolate that in the future and see maybe if we can talk about today through a lens of tomorrow? So for me, it was because I'm not what you would call a hardcore science fiction fan, but I did find myself naturally drawn to sci-fi as a device to talk about the human condition in general and the anxieties of South Asia and its own crises in specific.
So Anniqua, Arafat is talking about the crystallization of contemporary anxieties as something that he's been pouring into his version of cyber caliphate or khilafat, as he's mentioning. What do you think about science fiction, and what do you think of the role of this literature?
So what's fascinating about what Stan just mentioned about magic realism and in relation to colonial thought, I'm thinking, in the US, we've gone through so much anxiety over the past 4 years that I think there'll be a movement toward magic realism in addition to the continuation of science fiction. But in response to your question about the relationship between anxiety and the writing that goes with making sense of the world as it is around us, and I think, if anything, this current situation has that we're all in the way we're connecting online, and it's become a norm for a vast majority of people. We unwittingly, unknowingly have been pulled into the world of science. Here's my greatest fear, though. We know that large majority of people are not part of this online community or of this science and the artificial intelligence and all the things that are going around technology and science. I fear that the divide will increase even further than it already is. So as we make sense of the stresses that we're in, or the way science is changing our lives, there'll be many people who will not be part of that story. And I think those stories have to be told And those people have to be included in this community of storytelling, even if it's not yet in their periphery, or they are not necessarily part of that. Now, I know from the Pakistan perspective, in particular in South Asia, we know that cell phones are very much a part of people's lives. And so, again, this is science, technology that has, in the last 20, 30 years, has infiltrated in their lives, and they will find a place, the vast majority, but as storytellers, we need to create that space for them to see themselves in the way the world is moving.
So, Anniqua, that reminds me of William Gibson's saying from a few years ago, where he mentioned that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Um, so, I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the subject under discussion, which gave us this opportunity to connect, and that is Faraz's book 74. We're very excited about the book. I have read the book, and I would love to hear from Faraz as to what he was hoping to achieve with the book. And so, what is the book about? Would you tell our audience that, please?
Well, I think the book is exactly about what you just said. It said the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. So the book is basically about this kind of a dystopian future where people stop getting healthcare at the age of 73 because they feel that the resources need to be better utilized and that older people are taking up too much resource, basically, which is it's kind of a eugenics program, basically. So it's about this one person, Dr. Razia Nicoladze, who fights back against the system, who who believes in living up to the age of 74 against what the system has kind of planned for her. This is sort of I mean, it is based in a dystopian world, but it's not entirely disconnected from the reality. I mean, because healthcare costs do tend to go up as we live. So the system that we sort of live in which the expensive, the cost, the cost effectiveness of everything needs to be weighed. Uh, we do live in a system that kind of tells older people that they're not as welcome as younger people. Um, so this is part of the issue. So yeah, so the book is really about what you said. It's that the future is there, the technologies are there, the resources are there. We're living in a time where the phage technology, if that's the one used in the book, is widely available, but it is not accessible to all people. So yeah.
Thank you, Faraz. I was reading the book, and the idea of not being able to get to the age of 74. A few years ago, there was this gentleman. I'm forgetting which university he's from. He made an argument in the Atlantic Monthly about not wanting to live beyond age 74, 75, and said that's it. No more for me, no more for anyone else. So he made that hypothesis. And in that way, your book is anti that gentleman. It's a treatise against his particular peculiar stand. Stan, I think you have read Faraz's book, if I'm not mistaken.
I have.
I was wondering if you had any comments on this idea of inequitable futures, resources, and technologies.
Sure. And first, congratulations to Faraz. I did read 74. I enjoyed it greatly. Science fiction is there to express our hopes and our fears about the future and the present. And in a good work of science fiction like Faraz's, both apply at once. The, like the situation could become bad. That's the future aspect, but the situation is already bad, and that's why that extrapolation gets made. And it's a shock to the reader to think, I know it's already bad, and it could even get to this state, and it maybe causes action. I'm quite close to 73 myself, and I want to, my friend Bill Gibson, his saying is famous for a good reason, but it's not the future that is already here and is unevenly distributed, because this is a little joke on his part. The future's never here, and it always comes to all of us at the same speed. But justice is not evenly distributed, and the money is not evenly distributed. The money is already here, but it's very poorly distributed. So what happens when you have someone like Faraz going right to the main science, which is medicine? Everybody's concerned. Even the people, I really appreciated what Anniqua said about how magical realism will come back because of the insane pressures that we're under, and it's a return of the repressed. If science fiction is rational stories, then magical realism is your dream life and your unconscious, the return of the repressed. It never goes away, it always comes back. So this Faraz's story also is a kind of a dream of how things could go wrong if we don't concentrate on distributing the money on this planet evenly in a better system of justice. And since everybody runs to their doctor when they're sick, it's like the universal science that even people who say they're anti-science, they still believe in it when they're scared for their lives. So it's a short novel. It's a novella that is like a needle. It pokes a nerve. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Stan. Faraz, I'm going to stick with the book for just a little bit more. I do want to, there are a couple of themes in the book that I want to talk about. So I'm curious, the book is about a pandemic. And the book is about a situation in which a superbug, which is Neostaff, takes over the world. And as I'm sure Faraz and I both being in medicine, we know that antibiotic resistance is a big problem in Pakistan. And antibiotic abuse, especially because of over-the-counter availability, is a super big problem in Pakistan. Did you write this novella before COVID or peri-COVID or post-COVID?
I think that's an interesting question. I did write this before COVID. So yeah, but because this is something that we see in everyday practice, we've been warning people since forever that antibiotic resistance is developing. It's one of those slow-moving train wrecks that we know. It's like climate change. We know it's coming, and the public keeps expecting that the medical researcher that is going to pull a rabbit out of the hat at the last minute, and the resistance problem is just going to go away. But I don't think it's going away, and it's going to be especially devastating for countries like Pakistan. One, because we're poorer countries and our healthcare systems are less resilient, and other because, like you said, there's a lot of antibiotic abuse in this country. Sometimes you can get antibiotics there without even prescriptions, and yeah, that's a concern. So it's a bit of a cautionary tale. And while we're on the subject of the book, I would just like to add something to what we said about that 74-year-old gentleman writing that article in the Atlantic. And I completely agree to that. In fact, a number of people have said that. And I am kind of a proponent of that positivity of good stuff. But that's the thing. That choice lies with the person. That choice does not lie with the state. The state is responsible for keeping its citizens safe. They can't just sort of encourage the citizens to sort of remove themselves. And in doing so, the state's responsibility of taking care of them. Once again.
Thank you, Faraz. I'm going to move just a little bit. And since we are talking about dystopian futures, I'm going to ask Arafat about his work with Puffball Studios and his movie Swipe, which is a particularly interesting take on blasphemy laws and social, well, crowd-based fatwas and condemnation.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I didn't get to congratulate Faraz on the podcast here. I thought the book was brilliant. And just in one sentence, I felt like his control of information in the book, what he kept from me as I was reading, was pretty incredible and was pretty inspiring. And I went back with my friends to write. We're working on a screenplay for a feature-length chair at the bus, so we went back on screenplay as well. So if it's something can make me push there, I'm really almost grateful for this contribution to South Asian fiction. As far as Swipe is concerned, both Swipe and Share Tabassum, there's something common there, which is my interest in looking at how we have experienced state using technology and religion together and multi-corporations and powers in general, using language and then using language and weaponizing language and expression. For example, Ishq Rasool, honor. How do you weaponize sentiments? How do you weaponize expressions? How do you censor languages? For example, an Ahmadi cannot say Assalamu alaikum. That was the inspiration behind You Cannot Smile, because saying Assalamu alaikum is as intimately natural to all of us in Pakistan as smiling is to anyone else as well. So that analogy was very crucial for people to experience from a first-person perspective that technology and religion, if you don't look out for what's going on, if you don't look out for what the corporations are doing, if you don't look out for what the state is doing right now as we speak, then we're, as terrible as things are right now, they can get worse. With Swipe, the idea was very simple: crowdsourcing fatwas. The idea you democratize fatwas, and the critique that a lot of the people have to question and problematize that critique, that a lot of the Islamic tradition and Islamic institutions are not democratic enough. That the problem is that there are a few mullahs and there are a few powerful institutional lobbies that are controlling what religion is and is not. But in my mind, right now, what we have created, especially for our children, if you start democratizing who gets to be killed and not be killed, we've already seen that happening on Twitter multiple times. So for me, that was an important theme, and that was an important question to explore through the devices of sci-fi. But just a simple app of swiping right for Wajib al-Qatl and swiping left for Maafi, to have that binary thinking, and maybe to kind of land that emotional punch by the end, that it's not just the laws that are the problem. There is a huge 200-year-old discourse issue where we have weaponized sentiments, Ishq Rasool, honor. We have reimagined a very modern, technologically driven, and technologies have been used. First, the printing press was used. Now the internet is being used to mobilize people towards violence of all kinds. Violence is not just physical. Violence is linguistic, lisani jabr, lisani tashaddud. And one would call virtual violence in many ways when you start calling someone a Qadiani. If someone starts saying Arafat Mazhar is a Qadiani. So the use of that scares me. So in both the films, one thing is very clear, that we want to stay grounded somewhat grounded in where we are, with one thing very, very specifically changed, so that it is alien enough that we don't get attacked, that you're attacking Pakistan. So there is something alien enough about the story that you don't feel defensive. But at the same time, from the experiences that we have on what people talk about the film, it's also landing that we are talking about ourselves. And sci-fi really allows us to almost safely explore anxieties almost in a therapeutic space, that the future, present, and past collide in a way. So yeah, that was our experience so far.
So, as we saw with Cambridge Analytica, and as we're seeing in the last 6 years, technology is not just affecting the common man anymore. It's affecting peoples rather than people now. Anniqua, I was wondering if I wanted to ask you about your book, and I was wondering, I haven't read it. I would love for you to talk about it a little bit and tell us what it's about and what excites you when it comes to literature or science fiction literature.
So thank you for sharing that. And I also wanted to commend Faraz for writing the book and inviting people into the average person into the world of science. And even when I say average, it means the average person who can read English. So kind of, and that'll go deeper, but thank you for writing the book. And also for all of the time that you've written it, as in, what we're going through, and we can all experience it. And even the nuances of the gender, the woman, that perspective, the diabetes, common enough in my family as well. So all of those small things are very localized, and which makes it more appealing to readers of a certain community. So I just wanted to make sure I say that to Faraz. But from my story, Wild Boar in the Cane Field, um, I I wanted to also invite people into a world that is not commonly experienced, and this is the world of rural Pakistan or South Asia. I mean, there are some commonalities across the region, and I wanted to invite them into the world of a young woman, Tara, who was found on a train covered in flies. And this story is a story that is the kind of story that you will probably have heard from, aunts, uncles. It's kind of, there's always this foundling that you know of that has been taken into a family, but has not really been made part of that family. They are cared for. They are told that they are the daughter of the family or the son, but they're not really. And so I wanted to tell that story from that cultural perspective. But because there was so much trauma in the story, I needed those flies that had found the baby to actually tell the story at the end. And so that's why I used magic realism in this novel that I wrote. And all those belief systems, central to my story is the shrine of Sai Makhiyanwala, because we know that the vast majority of our people do have their own indigenous belief systems in addition to all of the others that are forced on them. So that, in a nutshell, is the story of uh, Tara in Wild Boar in the Cane Field, which is a literal to, barley, kamado mein, kheton mein barley or the boar. And this fear of animals. And so because I grew up on a farm in a village in Pakistan, and that connection with the animals, whether it's the buffalo or the boar or any of the other animals that you are surrounded by, I wanted to celebrate that connection that the people who live in that setting, how they connect and how they make the most of their lives. So that's what my story is about. But my newer project is, what Arafat was mentioning earlier about democratizing belief systems. uh, what my sister and I have, we're both educators, have spent many years in the education system. We feel that storytelling needs to be democratized as well. And there are so many people who do not write stories because they just don't think it's their purview. They don't think they have the power. And so we've created this website, the LISM, the magic of words from around the world, where we invite, kind of like Faraz has invited us into the scientific world of medical sciences, we're inviting people to tell stories, because we do know that as much as the stories that we who, and I feel being able to tell a story is a luxury, because you need time to think. And if you have young children, if you're at this time where you're particularly around this time where you're teaching, you're at home, you need more time to work with your children or caring for older adults. The having the time to think about your story, to write your story, to share your story, and then have the luxury of sharing it like we're doing today, having this kind of conversation. I feel very lucky that I am, in this sphere. So the goal is also to invite other storytellers into this realm that we have lucked out, as far as I'm concerned. It's we're in a good place.
Thank you, Anniqua. Faraz, I couldn't help but notice that both Anniqua and your book, in her book, The Animals and the Flies, and in your book, The Bugs and the Bacteria, it seems like there is an interface between the human condition and the environment. And I'm almost wondering if climate change is something real. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So yes, climate change is it's definitely a thing, and it's about our interaction with the environment and how we can't really escape the environment at any point. So we keep prioritizing stuff like the economy, all the time without sort of realizing that it's not distinct, it's not separate from the world that we live in. And I think this is a point that I really stressed on in the book as well, because it's a short book. I had to, I wasn't leaving anything up to chance there, or leaving a lot to interpretation over there, that we need to prioritize uh, the way we interact with the environment, because, yeah. So, and this is exactly what I was thinking as Anniqua was talking about her books. You're right.
So, I was recently listening to this TED talk about with a virologist who mentioned that the push by human beings into animal spaces is inevitably going to bring in more pandemics. Now we know that Stan has done a lot of climate fiction, and I'm wondering if Stan has any comments on climate fiction and whether there is hope for our species yet, or have we reached the tipping point?
Well, we have not reached the tipping point, because there will never be that one moment where we go from being okay to being doomed. We're on the edge of a slippery slope, or walking the ridge of a peninsula that on the one side are any number of catastrophes that could really crash human civilization. And yet on the other side, if we were to pull ourselves together as one species on one planet in a planetary civilization where everybody depends on everybody else, and this includes the animals and the plants. We've been speaking of medicine, and I would say that the great discovery of the last, I don't know, of this century is that 50% of the DNA inside your body is not human DNA. And when you realize that, everything changes in your conception of yourself. You realize you're part of a community and that your community is part of a bigger community. And I'm hoping that this will create a kind of planetary consciousness where everybody will get on board with the project of dodging a mass extinction event, of dealing with climate change. So I've been writing about this for the last several books, for sure, because if you're doing realistic science fiction, trying to write about the near future, it's an over-determining factor. You can't dodge it. It's the one subject. And I'm thinking also that what I've been trying to write are best case scenarios. So not the dystopia, but the utopia. Utopia has a very low bar now. If we dodge the mass extinction event, you can call that our utopia step one. And so everywhere, I think the problem is the same. And what I'm noticing is with this novel of mine, The Ministry for the Future, is that people wanted positive stories. There's a reaction to this book like I've never seen before to my fiction. And I think it's not the individual book, but the idea of imagining that we could get to a better place. There's a hunger for that story. So this is a hopefulness that will never die. As long as we're alive, we're going to be hoping that things will be better rather than worse. And these kind of stories are maybe a little bit depopulate. There's not enough of them to fill the desire for them. And that's what I'm seeing.
So, in 2005, Kurt Vonnegut, if I'm not mistaken, gave an interview for PBS in which he used the term or the expression that we have so many ministries, but there's no secretary for the future. And I was wondering if Stan had that sentiment in mind.
I was told that afterwards, the Vonnegut quote, and it makes perfect sense. He was a great science fiction writer, but I myself was at the Museum for Contemporary Culture in Barcelona, Spain. And there in Barcelona, they were doing a museum exhibit about the near future, what happens after the end of the world, and it was kind of a joke, there's not going to be an end of the world, and we have to keep on living on after these imagined disasters that seem to be bearing down on us. And they themselves had set up a minister for the future. And they said to me, and when they were interviewing me, there ought to be a ministry for the future. And this was 2017. And I just lodged that idea and thought, okay, that's a good way to structure this story.
Got it. Thank you, Stan. Arafat, I was thinking about this pandemic that's engulfed us, and one of the things I keep thinking about as a writer and as someone who hopes to work in science fiction, the pandemic has inevitably changed generations. It has caused mental health trauma. It has caused economic fallout. Do you think that as your role as a visionary or an Imagineer who's working with Puffball Studios, do you think it's going to change the way you approach art? Do you see a lot of pandemic related or reactionary art coming out of your studio or others?
I mean, I wouldn't know if I'm the right person to ask about other studios or not. I would feel myself it's a bit premature for me to predict that. I mean, the gut feeling is that yes, it would. There would be a lot of reactionary stories as well. Hopefully, processed stories. But I do know that for us, this was a transformative experience as a studio because we are a traditional animated hand painting studios doing science fiction in South Asia. And that's a mouthful of words right there because we had to learn how to animate. We were painting things that do not exist. We had to be imaginative. We had to write screenplays. And part of what Pandemic did, especially 3 months during the production process of Swipe, because Swipe was animated during the pandemic, was that we were working isolated. And what we couldn't do during that was what the frames that were coming in, the scenes that we were shooting, animating, didn't weren't landing. We were canceling them, and what we did eventually was all of us tested ourselves, whoever wanted to, as being negative. We locked ourselves in the studio for 4 months. We lived in the studio, isolated, and we animated. And that brought us closer in a very strange way. On one hand, it was surreal just waking up every day and that's the people you work with. And we were able to create better music. We were able to animate better. We were able to do better feedback. But it also became a lot more human because 5 to 6 months of virtual communication and all of us on your back, it transformed the way we looked at the process of creating. And at the same time, however, the alienation that everybody experienced during the pandemic was, I don't want to use the word trauma clinically, was traumatizing for a lot of folks. I remember a lot of outbursts that wouldn't happen during the regular 10 to 4s, like people all of a sudden just, myself including, having bursts and acting like people that you're not. It's like a bit of a cabin fever thing going on. But I think a bit more than that as well. It's just not a natural way to interact. And I think it has transformed the way we think of storytelling. It's a lot more collaborative now. So if we're 12 animators, musicians, screenplay writers, directors, producers, we are a lot more in sync with each other, and that has been the effect on us. And I know that may not be the exact question that or the answer that you might be looking for, but for us the effect has been very transformative in this way, that on one hand there's a greater emotional self-awareness of what it means to relate to another, and secondly it really transformed the way we think of storytelling itself as well, because we are a visual medium. What does it, and an audiovisual medium, what does it mean for cinema, for example? That's going to change a lot, by the way, because the moment we released our film, it was during the pandemic. All of a sudden we're getting production houses that we wanted to shoot this live action. We can't shoot this live action. Would you want to animate this? And so all of a sudden you need technological advancements on how you film as well. So there is a lot of dearth of live action cinema, obviously mainstream cinema as well. But I think we human beings are incredible as well. I think the kind of challenge that we're facing, the adversity that we're facing, is also going to bring a lot of not just substantive, but form changes as well. How do we tell these stories? Virtual reality stories, the mediums that we're going to see. I think I'm interested more in the transformation on the way we tell stories rather than the kind of stories that we might get. So, and I think I've already started seeing that students are a lot more interested in being part of companies before they even graduate because they're working from home. And a lot of folks are just saying, okay, we want to be part of the process, and they've got great ideas. So maybe we'll get more young storytellers. It's more accessible because you can work through Zoom and it's allowed. And I think that might be a transformative process for studios, animated filmmakers, at least the cinema world, independent cinema world. And that's, I think, the extent to which I may be able to comment on that question.
Thank you. Excellent comments. Anniqua, I was thinking about your book, and you used the word foundling for the girl who was found in the train covered with flies. You know, it made me think of changelings. And changelings are fairy babies that have replaced human babies. And foundlings and changelings in slums in India and Pakistan sort of take on a very interesting overtone. And then we throw in this pandemic, and all of a sudden the metaphor changes because a lot of us have become foundlings and changelings for each other. We have become different people. Do you have any comments on dissociation and these sort of dualities in your book or as your characters or in mythologies that you have ever looked into?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because the goal, and this is, I used to teach English as a second language for many years, and I've taught at, universities, and one of the points that some of my students would make to me is, we're going to be true to ourselves. We will not change. And sometimes and especially if you're immigrants, but even if you're not, even if there's this need in humanity to stay the same, because somehow that is a better form of being than reflecting on yourself and deciding, no, what I was thinking or the way I was behaving is probably not best for this current situation that I'm in, or as I move forward, or as what we've been talking about, the future, in preparing ourselves for the future and adjusting ourselves. And I think, to the point that Arafat was making about religious thought, there is this need for purity, for stability, because this is what we know best. And so in any story that we read, the ideal situation would be that the individuals have changed in some way. It can be a dramatic change, or it can be just that point in your life, in the story, where you think, I don't know why I've been doing this way. I need to really either speak out or just change my viewpoint in the world, change the way I think about things. So, I do feel, whether it is in the form of science fiction, whether it's magic realism, whatever form the story, whether it's a digital story that is being told, and in fact, to the point that Arafat was making about the way movies and filmmaking is changing, reading is also changed dramatically with Audible. We now are back to listening to stories. And we also know with blogs, we have this combination of the video with the text, with the sounds. And so, yeah, I do feel that whatever form that one might choose in how to tell the story, whatever genre that you might choose, you're always looking for some level of change. But I also feel that these genres, which to some extent have been, we elevate purity, but we know that the human need is to not stay as pure. And so even these genres of science fiction, magic realism, fantasy, speculative fiction, they're all being intertwined, the video, the imagery, and so on. And at some point, there will probably be another movement to try and purify the way we tell a story, and then it'll mesh all into, together in whatever form we have decided on. So I think it's a continuum of how we tell stories. I myself am focusing on, I'm thinking of another story which is based on I'm very focused on animals, even though I don't have pets. But my next book is Sanctuary for Dancing Bears, which is where my main character is a gamer. And so I don't know if it would be considered science fiction, but I'm placing it in the Potohar Valley where there is a sanctuary for dancing bears. It's the place that is important to me, but it's also the people. Yeah, this whole conversation about change and storytelling and where science intersects with our lives is fascinating.
Thank you. Faraz, in your book, there was this scene where your protagonist is going to meet his sister, and he meets this guard outside the building, and he says the name, the last name. He says Dr. Nicolazzi, I think, and the guard says, "Oh, the male doc," and he's like, "No, Dr. Nicolazzi. I shouldn't have to say it's a female." So I was thinking that it felt like a little bit of an Easter egg, and I was wondering, science fiction has historically been considered a progressive genre. How do you see this Venn diagram between progressives, activists, and science fiction, especially in the Pakistani scene recently that we've been witnessing for the last few years?
I mean, when you said progressive and science fiction, I mean, the first thing that comes to your mind is Star Trek, I'm guessing, because I think that's something of a poster in terms of, discussing racism or discussing gender equality through the lens of science fiction. In Pakistan, yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because, like you noted as well, and Anniqua noted as well, the choice to put Razia Nicolase, make the protagonist a woman, was really important for me there, because yeah, we need to make that statement as well. And this particular theme that you mentioned, yeah, you're right. This is because this is basically about rising above the titles and accepting that women, yeah, right.
And especially because we all know that, as happened with Dr. Jill Biden recently, we know what happens when men see women in a place of authority. Um, so, Stan, I was wondering, since you've been in the scene for a while and you are familiar with the Clarion workshops, I was wondering, do you think that workshops are helpful to aspiring writers of science fiction? Do they have a role to play? One of the things I'm thinking is, when I was going to Clarion, there's this writer that I'm not going to name, but I was talking to them and they said that they don't believe in workshops. And I'm not going to comment on what my opinion is, but I'm curious as to what you think about workshops and whether they can be helpful to aspiring writers and anything about craft that you might want to mention.
Sure. I am a child of the workshop system myself, but I also have my reservations about it as a process. The good in it is that is your fellow students in the workshop, your fellow workshop members become your first audience. And it actually can give you the false impression that audiences get back to you, which in the real world is not really true, but in the workshop is true. So you get feedback. And I sometimes compare them to these giant rock concerts where the musicians can't really hear themselves. And so they have a speaker at their feet that is faced right at them so that they can hear what they're doing. Workshops are like that. And they give you your first community and a kind of a team, like a sports team. So you cheer on your classmates. Um, the the downside is what I call homogenization. And workshops tend to think that they know how stories work. And that's not true. We don't know how stories work. It's a little bit more mysterious than workshops like to pretend with their vocabularies, their terminologies. In fact, there's something quite mysterious going on in storytelling, and Anniqua brought it up. It goes way back into the human history, far before written language. We were telling each other stories around the fires. It's as old as language itself, and it's a basic form of understanding the world. And it's not a algorithm. It's not a technology. You can't make up a vocabulary of 20 words and talk about well, even simple things, plot, character, but also beats or, backstory, or you used one earlier in this hour, Usman. I'm forgetting what it was. A workshop name for an effect. Well, writers maybe need to have those to talk to each other a little bit about what's going on, but readers are not thinking in those terminologies. Readers are reading as if they're in a dream. They suspend their disbelief, they live the story, and very mysterious things can happen in there. So what you want is to get the good out of the workshop, which includes professionalization to a certain extent, context, and ignore what might be bad in workshops, which is the sense that you know what stories are about and it's a kind of an algorithm that you can crank like a wheel. That's just not true. And you need to stay in the mystery of it.
Thank you very much, Stan. I tend to think of writing workshops as places where I have been able to find humility as a storyteller. Every single time they humble me as an artist. Arafat, talking about storytelling, and you've chosen a very interesting mode of storytelling, animation, cyber caliphate. You're bringing things to life in a way that maybe words sometimes cannot. What do you think about the scope of animation in Pakistan? And if you had advice for aspiring creatives in your field, what would you tell them?
I mean, so the scope of animation, hand-drawn animation, was a bit of a mystery for me before we released the two short 2D animations. Uh, Once we released the animations, and especially once we got to tour around 30 colleges, especially the young students, I realized how much love. I was in Karachi University's sociology department, and I realized that most of our storytelling is very sociological, our filmmaking. And all of a sudden, there are these people who are talking about missing persons and blasphemy laws and Balochistan and Bangladesh that never happened when I was actually giving lectures on blasphemy laws. 10 years ago, I was writing a paper. I got published in a peer-reviewed journal on the blasphemy laws. It was a formal academic paper. I then lived 10 years of going to Khatm Nabuwat conferences, hearing with my own ears, Tauheen Risalat ki ek hi saza, sartan se juda, and looking around and finding 10-year-olds listening to it. I remember this girl who was 7 because I talked to her father who had brought her in. And I realized that two things. Uh, what we wanted to produce, what we wanted to animate, one of the best ways to bring it to life, risk-free, was not to have actors. B, the first film we wanted to do literally had to be painted because we wanted to make a very alien world. So it started off with a painterly concept art. We were already doing animations for civic education. So for us, it was a natural progression from the world of activism and research and policy and advocacy, coming down to telling the same story that we told in an academic paper, but saying that in a fictional way, saying that through allegories, and saying that using devices, literary devices that I'm not sure what they're called, but we understood that those can be used to tell the same thing. Now, the reason we ended up using animation, apart from those two things that we already had the capacity and was a safe thing, was also we didn't want to be derivative. I know it's very difficult to be non-derivative when there's so much storytelling globally available all around. And I think what became very crucial for us was starting with a blank canvas. So not even using a CGI, not using 3D, but painting every frame. And I feel like that really helped us decide that we were going to 2D animation. As soon as the second film was done, the scope now for me became clear because we're doing 2D animated surrealist films on Partition. We're doing 3 short films funny short films on life of a WhatsApp message. All of a sudden, we're getting commercial projects as well, projects that has actual money. These 2 films were self-funded. And we see a demand for adult storytelling through animation. My advice to the animators and to creatives would be to really tell it, to be authentic to their experiences. So I'm someone who comes from Jamaat Islami. I grew up in a Jamaat Islami family, and I have an arc of my own understanding and resolving my own anxieties about religion and seeing and what I am most passionate about. So I want to stay. So do your research, not necessarily what I mean by research is not books, but experiencing your city. So Swipe would not be Swipe if half of the people here were not from Multan, because we were setting it in Multan. So as authentic as we can be, and finding your voice being uniquely your voice would come from observational drawings, from observational storytelling, and find a team. That would be great, especially if you're in animation. That would be that would be my lane of, because screenplay and animation is a separate thing from novellas and cinema storytelling. But that would be my advice: finding your voice, being authentic, and actually connecting to what you have already called the other. So if you think there's a Maulvi, go and talk to the Maulvi. You'll find a humanity to him that might surprise you.
That's kind of reminiscent.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's kind of reminiscent of something I was. Jeff Ford, who's a writer, a fantasy writer, he mentioned that he recently spoke with his neighbors are Trump supporters, and he said that he completely got snowed in recently, and he's a big Biden supporter. So he was rescued by his neighbors without him asking. So that disconnect between people and that pigeonholing, Arafat, I like that you mentioned that. Anniqua, I'm going to talk a little bit about the repression and the manifestation of human emotions, of suppressed emotions through magic realism that you mentioned. Freud has an essay called The Uncanny, where he talks exactly about this, the manifestation of contemporary, of sexual repression and other repressions. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and its role in your work or in your life as an educator?
Yes, and I'd like to share a bit of an experience I had in relation to science and the readings around science, and how it relates to the culture that I grew up in, and I still, the cultures that I seek around me while I'm in California. My father suffered from a stroke and was bedridden for 8 years before he passed away. And at the time, I was very discomforted in my role reversal as a younger daughter and my interaction with him. And my elder sister was very comfortable around him. And after he passed away, I read a book about a scientist who had gone through a similar experience, and she mentioned how in her lifetime, when she went through this experience of a stroke, she could feel, she couldn't enunciate, but she could feel how the people around her were feeling in the state that she was in. And so I shared this experience with my sister, who's not as fond of reading as I am. And she said, "And you had to read a book to know that?" And I said, "Yes, I mean, that is where I get all my knowledge from." And so this is kind of a running family joke that how could you have not felt that? And so I feel that of course, I'm not denying sciences or anything like that, but I feel sometimes we do not allow the human capacity to understand what's going on around them and the tools that they use to respond to those situations. And more, I'm a believer of, if you can think and reflect and observe and listen, you'll probably get a lot more out of that situation. And so, yeah, I do feel that observation and the listening to others and then getting the time. And so this is probably, again, maybe cultural, maybe gender related, but the need to communicate. I know people talk about writing being very isolating. I have found I have been more productive when I can talk through a scenario, a character, a motivation, a background with others who can help me untangle the web. And as a writer, it has made me more comfortable in my writing because I feel it's more of a communal effort. And so that is where I get my inspiration, sharing stories. And in fact, what has made this time so convenient is that I've been connecting with communities of writers across the world through Zoom, where we do our shut up and write, but we talk about what we're writing about. So I don't know if I'm fully answering the question that you proposed, but these are my thoughts as you talk about, what as human beings, how do we respond to situations, and where do we take, and how sometimes we have to dig deeper inside ourselves to then produce the work or the stories that we would like to produce. And a lot of times, at least for people like myself, having that community and the conversation around it is extremely helpful.
Thank you very much, Anniqua. I think that the best, if we had to summarize and crystallize the conversation, shut up and write would not be a bad note to conclude on. Thank you very much, everyone. I think that we're probably hitting our window. It was a wonderful, engaging conversation. Friends and audience, again, I present to you Faraz Talat, author of 74, whose wonderful book is out now from Folio Books. We have Stanley Robinson. His Ministry for the Future is out right now, I believe from Orbit, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And Arafat Mazhar, maestro of animation, director and producer of Swipe and Shahrat Tabassum, both excellent movies that I have watched. And we have Anniqua, and I haven't read a book yet, but I'm so excited to read it. Please pick up these books. Please support all our artists and authors. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us. If anyone has anything else to say, I give you the floor.